this morning after being out of town for a week. Glad to be here. I want to thank Brett for preaching for us last week. I appreciate that you preached 53 minutes as well. It's nothing worse than coming home and everybody says, "Oh, we had a short sermon last week." Nobody said that this week, Brett. So thank you. Thank you for helping me out. But I'm really glad that you preached. I heard you had a lot of your football team and things like that here last week, and that's great. I think that's one of the great things about other people preaching sometimes. You can invite your friends and people that you've influenced to be here and hopefully have a positive impact upon them. So thank you for doing that. Turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. We're going to be focusing on that today, and as you do so, I want to share with you the results of a survey that was conducted in 2024 among 12 to 14-year-olds from Gen Alpha in the United States. The question was asked to this group, what do you aspire to be when you grow up? And can you guess what the top career aspiration was on the list? Well, a whopping 32% said that they wanted to be a YouTuber when they grow up. 21% wanted to be a TikTok creator. 15% wanted to be an online streamer. Now, these three different career options are all part of one broad category, and that category is influencer. You want to be an influencer, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or online, whatever. There's a lot of people that want to be an influencer. Well, what is an influencer when we talk about it from the social media world? Well, in the social media world, an influencer is someone who uses various social media platforms to influence or to steer other people. And these people post content, it gets liked, it gets shared, it gets followed more than others, and it indicates their influence. And of course, the larger your platform, the more value you bring to the platform and other companies, other products, other causes that you might promote. And the top influencers, they're making money in the millions. So it's no surprise that young kids want to be the next Mr. Beast, who's number one on the list, or Jake Paul, who was number 3 on the list, or even Ms. Rachel, who's in the top 20. But unfortunately, if you were to walk through the list of some of the top influencers, we also begin to quickly see how some of them are seeking to gain influence. Some go viral because of their over-the-top pranks. Some of them are making millions because they're comedians. Some get attention because they're dressing provocatively and they act provocatively. Some rage bait, and if they can get enough people mad, they can actually get a lot of people to follow them. And so they light the fires of controversy to try to get influence. Some talk very sensually, and some use some pretty filthy language. Now, not every social media influencer needs to be villainized. There's some legitimately clean and productive content that is out there. However, as Christians, what I want us to think about is that we need to think deeply, first of all, about the importance of influence and how Jesus Christ has called us to exert that influence. If we're to define influence, here's what influence means. It is to affect or change how someone or something develops, behaves, or thinks, all right? So if you're influencing people, you're trying to change how they behave. You're trying to change how they think or affect how they think. And that can work in two different directions. If we think about the scriptures, we can see that there were people in Scripture who exerted evil influence. The serpent would have been one of the first ones in Genesis 3, right? Just go ahead and eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It doesn't matter that God doesn't want you to do that. Just go ahead and do it. That's an evil influence. Solomon's wives were an evil influence upon him in 1 Kings chapter 11. Evil companions corrupt good morals, we're told in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So people can have a bad influence upon other people. But in the Bible, there's lots of examples of people who had a good influence. Joshua says, "As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord." And he had a positive influence upon his generation. Paul says, "Imitate me as I also imitate Christ." He wanted to have a positive influence upon others. It's so much so that they could imitate him knowing that they were also imitating Jesus. Pure companions can have a good influence on him. But whether it's good influence or bad influence, one thing's for sure, your life influences people. Romans 14 and verse 7 says this, no one lives for himself, no one dies for himself. The idea is that when you live, it's not just on an island. You are influencing people by your life. And so we need to make sure that we're influencing people in the right direction. Well, there's a lot of different ways you could preach about influence. And one of the ways that we're going to look at today is by looking at the Sermon on the Mount, looking at Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, and what Jesus says here in these verses. This is one of the best texts about influence, where Jesus uses this illustration of salt and light. So Matthew 5:13 says this, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. After the Beatitudes, which we've been studying this year as we've been looking through the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus shares two similitudes to help us understand our role as influencers in his kingdom. Pliny the Elder once said this. He said, there is nothing more useful than sun and salt. And Jesus takes this idea of sun, light, and salt, and he teaches a spiritual lesson with it. So I want you to think for a few minutes with me about what it means to be salt and light. What did Jesus mean when he said, you are the salt of the earth and you are the light of the world? Well, one of the things that I think is indicated when he uses that term salt, and one of the things that it should cause us to consider is that salt is very powerful. And I think that when Jesus mentioned that you are salt, he wanted you to understand that you are powerful. Your influence is powerful. Think about salt for just a moment. Just a teaspoon of salt that's rubbed into a 16-ounce porterhouse steak, it can have a big, tenderizing, and flavorful impact upon that steak. And so when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, it sounds like a big task. We may be thinking, little old me, just a few of us, this congregation here, how are we going to impact the whole earth? You're the salt of the earth, he says. There's an old African proverb. It says this. It says, if you think that you are too small to make a difference, try spending the night in a closed room with a mosquito. You're more powerful than you think. Maybe you won't impact the whole planet, but you can have impact by your life. Joseph's wisdom had a profound impact upon the Egyptian nation. Gideon and his band of 300 soldiers may have been a minority, but by God's strength, they were able to save Israel and conquer the Midianite oppressors. Josiah implemented reforms that had a purifying effect upon the Israelite nation in the Old Testament. Esther made a request that helped reverse the plot of Haman and the Persian nation and saved her people by the courage of that request. Jesus dies to save the entire world. And then Jesus sends out a band of 12, mostly uneducated fishermen, to tell the world that they are to take the gospel from coast to coast. And they did just that. Do not underestimate what God can do with just a little bit of salt. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. That's used sometimes in a negative sense, but it can also be used in a positive sense. Just a little bit of salt can have a big impact. You can have an impact upon the future of your family, the future of this church, the future of this nation for generations to come. You are the salt. Salt is powerful. Salt also suggests purity as we think about it. Salt, because it's white, because of its origins, it's without preservatives, it's without additives. It is often associated with the concept of purity. Often when you're buying salt, some labels emphasize that this is pure sea salt, in contrast to the synthetic lab-created salt. When Jesus was teaching, he didn't have to worry about synthetic lab-created salt. If it was salt, it was pure salt. All salt was pure, and all salt was essential to have on hand in every household. Now, Jesus, just a few moments earlier, if we remember some of our teachings in the Beatitudes, he'd emphasized in Matthew 5 and verse 8 that it's important to be pure in heart. And I think some of what he's teaching about being salt and light continues this progression of thought from if you become a kingdom citizen and you are pure in heart, what kind of impact are you going to have? Well, you're going to be salt. You're going to act pure. And so be pure in your life. Salt suggests purity. If you want to ruin your influence, then live hypocritically. Be two-faced, be double-tongued, live two different lives. But if you want to impact the lost world, they need to see purity of heart. They need to see it in our motives. They need to see it in our speech. They need to see it in our action. We need to be people who are pure. That is, we're people who stay away from sin and live with a pure heart. Salt suggests purity. Salt also preserves. That was one of the purposes of salt, especially in ancient times. It was used for preservation. Prior to modern refrigeration, salt was the primary means of preserving food for longer periods of time and for slowing decay. If any of you still do some canning, and I know some of you do, one of the very important ingredients to have on hand if you're going to can stuff is you got to have some salt, because salt preserves things. Salt is a preservative. So if you were going to preserve meat, it would be salted with a granular salt. It often was buried in the cool depths of an underground meat locker so that meat would keep longer. A saltwater brine was also used to preserve fish or vegetables. When that little boy brought Jesus 5 loaves and 2 fishes, it's likely that those 2 fishes were salted fish that had been preserved, that he had packed for his lunch that day. Even in ancient Egypt, salt was used in the embalming process to preserve bodies for longer periods of time. Salt's used in these ways because what salt does is it kills bacteria. It slows down decay. Now think about that in terms of the Christian. The Christian is the world's preservative. We as Christians, by the grace of God, we keep the world from spoiling and rotting and decaying. And we can either contribute to the decay of the world as individuals, or we can hold the decay of the world at bay by how we live our lives and the influence of our lives upon this world. Now, it might sound cliche, but Jesus wants us to be the type of people who make this world a better place. People, when around Christians, they ought to be improved by our influence upon them. Have you ever been around someone who made you want to be better or who made you think twice about being bad? Back when I was in Kokomo, when I used to play basketball, once I hit 40, I retired from basketball. But when I used to play basketball, I'd get up about 2 or 3 days a week. We'd get up and play with a bunch of guys around 6 a.m. And most of these guys, we would play at the Y. And most of these guys were guys that were good guys. Several of them were just preachers, denominational preachers from other places, but they were good moral guys. And we would get up at 6 and we would play. And one of the things that I loved about playing with them is they didn't cuss. And when a new guy came in and he would let a cuss word fly, there would be somebody who would say, "We don't talk like that here. That's just not, we don't want to hear that." And they would just say something to him. And I enjoyed playing with a group of guys like that because not everybody's like that. They made the court a better place. When people wanted to undercut you, when people started to get angry and were thinking about fighting, they stopped that. They put an end to that. They would say, "We didn't come here to get hurt. We didn't come here to get in a fight. We don't want to go to the hospital. We don't want to call the cops. We want everything to be calm." And they just kept everything calm. And being around those people, it was a good way to start your day at 6 a.m. Just some good exercise around a good group of people. There's people that you can spend your time around, though, that they're not a good influence on you. You kind of regret being around them. You feel guilty sometimes having been around them, even ashamed maybe. Are you the type of person who makes other people better? We need to be that type of person. Salt preserves. Take the influence of Christianity off a team, and if you take it out of a home, and if you take it out of a community, And if you take it out of a nation, you're going to eventually find yourself a deteriorating people. Christians hold the world at bay. We preserve. Salt also helps palatability. I don't know about you, but I think some salt makes things taste a little bit better. So I'd like to think that we, in our lives as Christians, we just make the world a little bit of a better place. How do we do that? Well, when Christians are exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit, they fill the world with love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All these qualities make the world a better place. We don't have to have laws against someone being kind, because kindness helps the world. It doesn't hurt the world. We don't have to have laws against anything that's there in those fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5, 22 and 23. That's one of the points that's made in Galatians 5. We don't have laws against this because this is the type of thing that we want to see in our citizens and in our communities. We make the world a better place. We make it more palatable. Christians should make the world a better place. If you are following the Beatitudes of Matthew 5 in your life, and you are someone who's poor in spirit, you are someone who mourns for the sins of the world, you are someone who's meek, humble, you're someone who hungers and thirsts to do the right thing at all times, you're someone who's merciful to other people, someone who wants to be a peacemaker, not a troublemaker, a peacemaker, and someone who's willing to stand for righteousness, even if it means being persecuted, you make the world a better place. There are people who have seen other Christians act in a way that's not Christian-like. And I've heard this from people who've said, if that's how a Christian acts, then I don't want to be a Christian. What a sad thing to say. And the problem is not that that's how Christians act, that's how hypocrites act. When Christians act the way that they should, the way Christ acted, the way Christ calls us to act, people don't say that about Christians. The world becomes a better place. It becomes more palatable because of the morals of Christianity. Imagine a world that's absent of honesty. It's just filled with constant lies. You're constantly at rest when you're around liars. Imagine a world that's just filled with sexual unfaithfulness, devoid of any concept of marital fidelity. That's a world where homes are rocked. Imagine a world where people are always drunk, people are always high. Sobriety and self-restraint are completely absent. That's a sad world to live in. But sadly, that is the world that many are living in right now. And Christians are supposed to introduce a moral ethic that stands in contrast to immorality, makes the world more palatable. Salt also produces a thirst. Eat a salty ham, and you're going to want some water later, right? Christians ought to live in such a way that it produces a thirst from others. People want to know more about Jesus Christ because of the way that we live. They hunger and thirst for righteousness. But let me mention this also. When you look at this text of Matthew 5, it actually tells you that saltless Christians, if you're not going to be salt, if you're not going to be pure, if you're not going to make the world a better place, more palatable place, saltless Christians are pointless Christians. It's pointless to be a Christian if you aren't going to have an impact. Jesus essentially says that if you're not going to be salt, if the salt has lost its flavor, he says you are good for nothing. At least in terms of your moral ethics and your moral influence, you're good for nothing. And do you know one of the reasons that some Christians are having very little impact upon the world? It's because some Christians are acting just like the world. You will have no impact on the world if you're acting just like it. What would make someone want to be a Christian when your lifestyle and your morals are nearly identical to their current lifestyle and their current morals? There's got to be something compelling and persuasive about our lives that encourages change. And so Jesus says, be salt. But he also says that he wants us to be light. He wants us to be light. He wants us to be influencers for God. And so, what he says in Matthew 5 and verse 16 is this one short verse. He says this, you are the light of the world. City that's set on a hill cannot be hidden. They don't light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. It gives light to all who are in the house. And then verse 16, it says, so let your light So shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Well, how does a Christian shine their light? Jesus says, let your light shine. How do we do that? Let me give you just a few things there, too. One of the things that we have to start out with is this, that light reflects. Light reflects off of water. Light reflects off of mirrors. Jesus is himself the light of the world, we're told in John 8 and verse 12. So if you are going to be light, then you're going to do it by being a reflection of the light of Jesus. Christians are to be a reflection of Jesus so that we can touch people where Jesus himself may not directly reach. There's a difference in being the light and in reflecting the light. If we're going to influence others, we've got to learn from them and we've got to imitate Jesus. So light reflects. It all starts with him. We have to keep that in mind. If you don't know Jesus and don't try to emulate Jesus in your life, don't expect to reflect much of Jesus in your life. Light reflects. So we reflect the light of Jesus. But light also shines. It's pretty simple, right? Light shines. Jesus makes this point in verses 14 and 15. He says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, right? I'm going to light a lamp and then cover it up. We put light on a stand. Now, keep in mind, there weren't, in Jesus' day, chandeliers like these and these bright lights that I just looked into that just blinded me. There weren't anything that was operated by electricity. So if you wanted to light a room up, what did you do? Well, a lot of times they had these little oil lamps, and they would put some oil in them, and they would have a wick, and then I'm acting like that they had Bic lighters. They didn't have Bic lighters either, right? They had to light the lamp, and then they would put it on a stand, and they would put it in a room, and that would give off enough light so you could kind of see what you're doing in a room once things got dark. You did that for a reason. You did that for a purpose. You wanted people to see the light. You wanted people to be able to see. And the simple lesson that Jesus is teaching by what he says here is it gives light to all who are in the house. You want it to light up the room. Followers of Jesus shine and they stand out. A secret disciple is like a lamp that's covered up by a basket. It has little value. So I have a question for you. Do people outside of this church building, do they even know that you are a Christian? Do they know? Because a Sunday only, church building only Christian isn't much of a light to a dark world. Jesus didn't say, you're the light of the church. He said, you are the light of the world. You're a light outside of this place and outside of these people. Meaning we've got to act like Christ calls us to act outside of our Christian circle. And I'm afraid sometimes we act like Christians when we're around other Christians, but then we become different people or just secret Christians when we're out in the world. When the rest of the world is living in darkness, Christ's followers dare to be different. We do not sway from the standards. We shine in darkness. Now, if you're to read the rest of the context of the Sermon on the Mount, which we're going to continue covering this year, but it's a great demonstration of how we can do just that. When the rest of the world is full of anger and hate, one of the next thoughts that Jesus is going to go to when you start reading Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, is when the rest of the world is full of anger and hate, we act with kindness and we try to reconcile our differences. When the rest of the world is pursuing porn and is saturated in sinful lust, we behave with self-control. And we realize that's something we need to stay away from as we live with self-control. When the rest of the world is treating marriage like it's an option, we still value it as a covenant between God and man. And so there's security in the marriage of two Christians because two Christians' marriage is built upon that rock, that foundation that we believe that marriage is permanent. It's important. It's to be valued. Loyalty is necessary. When the rest of the world is willing to be dishonest for personal gain, we're people who are trusted. Our yes is our yes, our no is our no. We mean what we say when we say our words. When the rest of the world vengefully attacks or cuts off our enemies, Jesus says, love your enemies. Treat your enemies differently. And while the rest of the world is consumed with money and with things and with possessions. All of chapter 6 is really about that. We keep our focus on our good God who provides all things, and we're willing to live with simplicity. In a world that values uniqueness, and that's the world where we love uniqueness, you be you. Well, there will be nothing more different and unique than a Christian who operates by those standards. You will be unique if that's how you function. And you will be a light to the lost world. And so we've got to be a light, not just here, but when we're ordering our dinner at the restaurant, when we're in the cubicle at the workplace, when we're in the classroom with other people in college, when we've got people over to our house. We're a Christian no matter where we are, shining our light no matter where we are at. Light shines. But here's another thing light does. Light exposes. Light exposes. You turn on the light in a dark room so that you can see the lurking dangers, so that you can avoid stubbing your toes, so that you can avoid knocking over furniture as you walk. We want to see the problems which might trip us up. We want to see the bad guys in the corner. So when I get home, I turn on the lights. Just want to kind of take a look around before I walk in. We want to see things. Christians have a duty to expose sin, not because we're trying to act as hurtful judges, but because we're trying to be helpful protectors of people's souls. Light exposes. C.S. Lewis once said this in Mere Christianity. He said, Jesus Christ didn't say, go into all the world and tell the world that it's quite right. We're going into all the world and we're calling upon people to repent and turn to Jesus, which means there's got to be some exposure when it comes to our work as Christians. Those who love sin and ignore its consequences, they're going to hate the light because self-willed people hate to be exposed. But those who love to be careful in their walk with God and those who love the light of God's word being shown upon their lives, they're going to appreciate when you shine a light on the darkness of our hearts, the darkness of our deeds, and when you try to correct people so they can walk in the light. When we were going through the airports, one of the things you got to do now is you got to walk through the X-ray scanners. And when they started putting those X-ray scanners in, I heard lots of people complaining and all kinds of people moaning and groaning. I know some people, they won't go to the airport anymore because I'm not going to let that thing scan me. I like the scanner. I'm glad they're checking to make sure nobody's got a gun or a bomb on a plane. Thank you. They're exposing, they're looking for danger. And I appreciate the safety of getting on a plane knowing that at least they've tried to do their due diligence to protect the people who are on it. We don't get mad at that person who's running the X-ray scanner. We should appreciate them. Love warns of the danger ahead. Sometimes light exposes, and we appreciate when light exposes things. Light guides also, though. Light guides. Why do airports line the runways with lights? I'm glad they have those lights because it lets the person landing the plane know where to land the plane. So you can see the runway when you're landing in the dark. Why do we line walkways with lights? So you can see where the edge of the walkway is. It acts as a guide, so you make sure that you stay on the path. What was the original purpose of placing a lighthouse near a seaport? So that when ships are cruising around in the dark and there's not any light that can be seen on the corners of that island or wherever it is that they're cruising around by, they can see where the edges are and the danger of the storm. The lighthouse can beckon people to come to the island if they're looking for safe harbor, but also protects those ships from running aground when they see the edges of that lighthouse. Well, in these settings, the purpose of light is to guide our path, to show us the way. And one of the things, if you're going to be light, one of the things that you're willing to do is to admit that as a Christian, it's my job to try to show people the way by both what I say and by how I act. I want my life to be a light to other people in that it can be a guide for them. Shows them how the Christian life should be lived and helps them to live it in their lives. Christian is a person that is worthy of being followed because they set the standard and they help us to see the goal. And so you're a guide if you're a Christian. You're a guide. Light guides. But here's the other cool thing about Christianity and being a light is light also impresses. When the solar eclipse came through a couple of years ago, we were still living in Indiana at that time, and it was coming right over top of our house. So we didn't even have to leave our house. I know some people drove miles to get into, that line of view where you could be where the eclipse was going to be. So we just sat on our back porch with our little eclipse glasses on and watched that thing. Impressive. It was impressive to see. Light impresses. Everybody wants to go see a solar eclipse because it's just impressive to see. Like a chandelier in a drab room, like a fireworks show in a night sky, light can be a lovely thing. And Christians, by being who God calls them to be, you can be impressive. And whatever light people see in us, it's important to note, it's not intended to impress them with us personally. It's intended to impress others with Jesus, who is, Hebrews 1:3 says, the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Are people impressed as they see you, shining the light of God by your good works? And are you living a life of beauty that is worthy of admiration? When you see a Christian who really lives a life of service and sacrifice, it's impressive to see. Those are the people that we should aspire to be like, people who do make the world a better place. They're impressive. And so, shine. Shine. Jesus tells us that we need to shine. Philippians 2, where Andy read earlier, says this, be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life. My kids did a camp, this was a few years ago when we were in Ohio. It's called Camp Noah. And I think Zoe and Hattie both had the same. Were you guys both in the same cabin? No? Okay, Zoe. It was Zoe then. But she's shaking her head. She does not like being used as an illustration. Sorry, you're a preacher's kid. It happens. Love you. But one of our cabin counselors would always say, both of the cabin counselors would say, shake and shine. Okay, shake and shine. And they get that, right, from being a salt shaker and being a light. Shake and shine. And sometimes, if I ever post something about my kids on Facebook or something like that, you'll still see, if you see someone say, shake and shine in the comments, that's the cabin counselor, because that was their motto, and that has been ingrained in their head. Shake and shine. I want you to be salt, and we want you to be light. Shine as lights in the world. Well, a few final thoughts, and then the lesson is yours about salt and light. All right? Thought number one. Christians need to be careful not to encourage avoiding contact with the world if salt and light is going to do what it's intended to do. We cannot hide from the world. So if we're to learn something from Matthew 5:13 through 16, that's one of the things I want you to remember. You cannot hide from the world. The salt needs to get out of the shaker if it's going to preserve the meat. A light has to be placed in a dark room if it's going to do its job. Christians cannot be so afraid of the world and being around the world if God's going to do what he intends to do with us. And so we cannot hide from the world. So let's make sure that we get around the world a little bit so that we can have an influence on it. Number two, we need to be very cautious of ruining our salt. Jesus seems to indicate you can ruin your salt, you can ruin your good influence. If you mix salt too much with other dangerous minerals and chemicals, it can become toxic instead of helpful. And when Christians have so much of the world in them, their hypocrisy, their lukewarmness, their compromise, it becomes repulsive. James said in James 1:27, we must be unstained from the world. So be cautious of ruining your salt. Keep yourself unstained from the world. But finally, remember what this is about. It's not about you. It's not wanting people to glorify you, to honor you, and to give you the praise. That's what the Pharisees did. They were interested in the honor. No, this is about God. We're not trying to be a good example to promote ourselves like a social media influencer who's looking for popularity or monetary gain. That's not what we're trying to do as Christians. Our job is to simply be vessels that help people see the power that Jesus has in our lives and that he can have in other people's lives too. This is about God and leading people closer to him so that people will glorify God in heaven. And so that's our goal. So be salt and be light. The lost world needs Christians. The lost world needs Christians to be what God intends for Christians to be. There is someone out there who is depending on you to be a light that shines through the darkness and through the clutter of their hearts, through the decay of their souls, and shows them that there's a higher purpose, there's a bigger meaning, there's a greater hope than they're living for currently. They need that from you. We as Christians are signposts to the world. If you're going to change the signposts out on State Road 72 or out here on Helton Drive, and you start pointing signs in different directions, in the wrong directions, or just changing the signs completely, it is going to cause a lot of chaos from people who don't know their way around. Let's make sure that we are people, when they see us and know that we are Christians, we are people who are actually pointing others in the right direction by our words and deeds. The world needs you to be an influencer, so may you courageously be the positive influence that God's called you to be in this world. Are you living for Jesus yet? Are you living for Him yet? The world would be a better place once you fully commit to doing that. Jesus is the light of the world. We reflect His light. If you haven't made that decision to start doing that yet, you got the opportunity this morning. Turn from your sins. That's what fades your light. That's what ruins your salt. Turn from your sins. Turn to Jesus Christ. Confess your faith in Him. Be baptized into Jesus Christ. So all those past sins will be washed away, and He'll give you a new start, a new chance to impact and to influence the world for good. If you haven't made that decision yet, why don't you come? Always stand while we sing.